I want to segue more into that conversation, I guess, through this individual you've deemed or termed Rabbi Ferris. But before we talk about him, I want to ask you about the ADL, Elon Musk, X, and this conversation now that's taking place about free speech versus reach. So prior to October 7th, the ADL and a coalition of different groups threatened to pull advertising from X as soon as Elon acquired Twitter because they claimed that there was a rise in hate speech and that Elon was uh, fomenting that or festering that, and he wasn't addressing it, and they saw a rise of anti-Semitism, so they claim, and they wanted to pull advertising, but they never did so. Then October 7th happens, and Palestine content is like flying on Twitter. Our videos were going viral left and right. Our reach has since been suppressed, like many other people have been experiencing posting about Palestine. But at the time, it was performing really, really well. And then I think the straw that broke the camel's back for Elon and ADL is when he got on the Lex Fridman podcast. I don't know if you remember this, but he made a very small comment that was incredibly reasonable. I'm going to paraphrase it, but essentially it was something along the lines of violence begets violence. So if Israel kills someone in Gaza, they create 5 more fighters. So if you want to stop creating fighters and the need to fight, then you should, maybe take a more peaceful approach. That was essentially his message. And that clip went viral, and a lot of people saw it as, oh, Elon is allowing Palestine content to go viral. And now he's like seemingly criticizing Israel's response in Gaza. Shortly after this, advertisers actually pulled out of X, and this put Elon in a position where he was panicking, and he goes on the propaganda tour in Israel. He's at the kibbutz, and then he's at Auschwitz with Ben Shapiro, and then all of a sudden, pro-Palestine accounts start getting censored on X. And so his argument has been, well, I'm not really censoring speech, even though some people have been outright banned ever since then. But he's saying, I'm not really censoring your speech. I'm limiting your reach. You have the right to say whatever you want. You don't have the right for anyone to hear it, though. So what is your take on that entire situation between Elon, the ADL, free speech?
Well, has he actually come out and said, I'm limiting Palestinian reach? I don't think he's said it.
No, he's never said that directly, but there's been this conversation about
there's a wider principle that he gave, because before Elon took over, had been banned from Twitter for some bogus reason, but I was reinstated, and I experienced the same thing. Like posts related to Palestine were going viral, getting hundreds of thousands of views very easily. But then suddenly there's a switch that was turned off, and then you can barely get 10% of the same kind of reach. So it's very obvious that something changed with their algorithm. And then you look at the Israeli accounts, and they're at the same level, if not more so. Even their viewership, because that's a different metric, like the impressions that you get versus the likes. Mm-hmm. So the likes and the reposts that those Israeli accounts are getting don't justify 500,000, 1 million, 8 million impressions. So people have noticed this kind of discrepancy, and I would prefer the kind of methods of X and Elon Musk as opposed to like Meta. Like Meta will just outright, they don't even care if you protest, they'll just take you off completely. Mm-hmm. Even YouTube to a certain extent, even though they're not as bad as Meta, they'll just take you off. But so it's the better of two possible worlds. I think Elon having control of the platform is better than if it was just a corporate entity like Meta or these other big tech companies. But the phenomenon, it just proves that if people are allowed to freely talk, a lot of the narratives that are given so much weight would collapse. It's like this whole bubble phenomenon, like the pro-Zion, the idea that the world is backing Israel, that's like a bubble. Like it's just inflation, like by artificial inflation from the media and from social media algorithms and from mainstream news saying that, oh yeah, there's a equivalence here between Israel and Palestine, and Israel is dealing with a really difficult situation. They're the only democracy in the Middle East. Like that kind of narrative is so empty and so bogus. It just takes like a couple of Twitter accounts to debunk it and then reach millions of people. So you have to clamp that down in order to keep the bubble sustained. And so that's what Elon has had to do. But despite that algorithm manipulation, still we see so much animosity towards the genocide that Israel is conducting, and that is a big change from the past. I don't know if you felt it because you've been active for quite a while as well in these spaces. I feel like things have really changed with how people understand this whole quote unquote conflict. The images of dying children, the images of mutilated bodies, even the mainstream news is feeling the pressure to report these atrocities in a way that isn't so biased, because it's just so outrageous what Israel is doing that even they feel like they have to have some level of even-handedness. And I see older generations in October 7th, like they were pro-Israel. Now they're completely against Israel. They're like, Israel needs to stop. This is disgusting. What are they doing? It's like their eyes have been opened. And so this is a complete PR disaster, collapse of the bubble for Israel. And I think that's what's partly pushing them to commit even more atrocities, because they're like, well, we've lost all our credibility, so we might as well just go all the way.
Yeah, we need to make the most of this situation. I agree with you. I've noticed it as well. I've been involved in Palestine activism for 14 years now, since about 2010. And I can tell you, as an activist and an organizer in the past, all we could celebrate is the narrative is changing. The narrative is changing. That's all we could celebrate. And so I agree, the narrative has been changing, and it's changing at a rate that it's never been this fast before, and their narrative has never collapsed so enormously before. This is a complete and utter PR disaster, as you've described it. Of course, I wish we could move on from just changing the narrative and actually change what's happening on the ground, but that takes time. It's a generational effort, as I've had to learn over the years. But definitely the narrative is changing, and the way I view it is the biggest defeat that the Zionists are facing is that they've had to reveal how much power they have. Because you can't challenge power if you don't know where the power lies. And we as a community, because we've been attacked by Zionists for so long, we've known who has a lot of power. Not to say they have all the power, but they have a tremendous amount of power, especially in the West and the United States specifically. And we have been victims of that. Like, we have members of our community who are Palestine activists and organizers who spent life in prison or were deported. Their families were destroyed. Communities were destroyed. Our community in Tampa, suffered.
Trust nothing.